Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Tailored Expressions YouTube channel. This is Mindy Eggen. In today's video, we are going to mass produce 3 Mother's Day cards. I'll be using a handful of new products from Tailored Expressions, starting with this Best Buds stamp and stencil set. This is a red rubber stamp set, and then it also has a coordinating stencil. You can see this is a red rubber stamp that gives the lines of the stems and some of the leaves. And here's a look at the coordinating stencil, which I will show you how to use and how we can quickly create 3 cards. This is the mini strips, You're the Best, and I'll also be using the mini strips die. This includes sentiments like I love you, cheers to you, you're the best, and happy Mother's Day, along with many others. This is the On the Block Mom stamp and die. And then I'll also be using additional products such as a Social Butterfly, Wood Plank, and the Hearts Stacklet. The inks that I'll be using today are Oreo, VersaMark, Pineapple, Strawberry Milkshake, Lavender Glaze, Granny Smith, Blueberry, and I'll also be using Saltwater Taffy, which I forgot to include there. The cardstock I have is Oreo, Sugar Cube, Blueberry, Toffee, Pineapple, Gumball, Granny Smith, and Pink Champagne. A few of the additional products that I'll be using are my blender brushes, my anti-static powder tool, tweezers, white embossing powder, my Scotch tape runner, I have some foam sticky strips, and my removable tape. To start making my card fronts, I'm going to start with the red rubber stamp, lining that up in my MISTI, and then I'm going to stamp this down onto a piece of grid paper here in my MISTI. I'm using Oreo ink to stamp this down. Normally, if I'm going to stamp one background, I wouldn't stamp this, but because I'm going to mass produce 3 of them, and you could do many more, it's easier for me to do it this way. Then I'm taking a piece of sugar cube cardstock, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I'm going to line it up about where I want the prints to be, and then I'm going to just take a pencil and mark in my corners. That way I know where my next piece of cardstock is going to go, and it'll make it a lot easier to quickly produce all of these cards. Now on the back of that sugar cube cardstock that I have in there is just a little piece of tape runner that's just going to hold it in place for me. And then once I stamped my first background here, I'm just going to twist it and pull it up. And then I can align my second piece in those little corners that I had marked with my pencil. Then I can stamp it again with the Oreo ink, and I'll repeat this one more time for my third background. Then I'm going to set these off on the side to dry for a couple minutes. I want to make sure that black ink is really nice and dry before I do any ink blending. Now I'm going to bring in my 2-piece coordinating stencil. And if you've worked with Tailored Expressions stencils before, you know there's a little etching down in the bottom corner. And if you notice on this stencil, this is showing it as landscape. We want it to be portrait, so I'm going to just turn my stencil. I could also have turned my cardstock, but I want these in portrait orientation, and that's what I'm comfortable working with. So I just turned my stencil, and now you have lines on here, the etchings of the leaves that you can line these up with your background. So the first color I'm going to start with is Pineapple, and I'm using my blending brush to apply this ink. I'm going to go over the entire background of this with that pineapple ink, and I am going back and forth over the entire flower. I want to make sure that I have even coverage. Then once this piece is done, I will carefully remove it, and I'm going to bring in the second part of this coordinating stencil. So once again, I'm just finding the etching, and I'm going to just turn it to the left so that it lines up with my background again. Line up those etched lines, and I'm going to hold this in place with some Scotch removable tape. Then my second color is going to be Strawberry Milkshake. I decided to make this one really springy. I have 2 other color combinations that I wanted to share with you, but this one is just using the yellow and the pink, similar to what's on the cover of the stamp set. And once again, using a blending brush and just going over all of those areas again. I want to make sure I'm going back and forth so that I'm getting the entire area of those flower stencils. And this is why we wanted that black ink to dry. We don't want anything to smear. Then I can carefully peel that up, and we have this beautiful spring background. So I'm going to set this one off on the side, and I'm going to bring in my second stamped piece. Once again, it has a little bit of tape runner on the back to hold it in place. And this is my first layer. Again, notice I didn't clean it because I planned on using the pineapple ink again. So once again, just going over that entire background with the pineapple. Then I'll remove this and place down that second layer. I did wipe this clean with a baby wipe. And now I'm going to bring in saltwater taffy. So this is a really pretty light blue color combination and go over the entire background with that color. So I'll just finish ink blending this entire panel, and once that's done, I'll remove that stencil and I'm going to clean off both of these with a baby wipe. Notice that the leaves are open yet, which you can leave, or we can color them in, which I'll show you in just a moment. So this background I decided to have a little bit of fun with. I'm using pineapple ink and I'm just going in certain areas of this first layer of the stencil. Some flowers I'm blending in all the way, others I'm only doing partial blending. Then I'm going to leave that there, and I'm going to bring in my strawberry milkshake. Now I don't want this yellow to transfer just yet, so I'm going in between the flowers and just wiping away any excess ink. I want it to blend on the cardstock to make orange, but I don't want to pick up that yellow and make orange right away. So some of the flowers I want to leave bright pink. Others I want to blend on just the tips so I get kind of that orange transition. And other flowers I am just going to leave yellow. So now this is still just our first layer of the stencil, and look how beautiful that background is. You could repeat those same colors on the second layer of the stencil, but I'm going to change it up and I'm kind of almost creating a rainbow. This one on the second layer is saltwater taffy, so that very light blue that I used. Once again, just kind of going sporadically around the card. And then I'm going to come in and wipe off any of the excess. Now I did start ink blending a little bit of the lavender glaze before I remembered to wipe off my ink. Then I'm bringing that lavender glaze back in, kind of adding it a little bit to the tips of the flowers. Some flowers I want to have all the way colored in, so I kind of have that great variety of color throughout the entire background. And so now when I removed that stencil, we have this beautiful array of colors on our background. I just love this one. I'm going to then bring in my mini strips stamp set, and I'm going to stamp all of my sentiments at once. So I'm just taking this and lining this up in the bottom of my MISTI. Make sure to remove your foam insert from your MISTI. Pick that up with the door of the MISTI. And now I'm going to do all of the stamping at once. So I have Granny Smith, Blueberry, and Oreo cardstock here. I'll just do one on screen, but off screen I do stamp all of them at once. So I'm going to hold that in place with my magnet, put over some anti-static powder, and then I'm going to ink up my stamp set with the VersaMark ink and stamp that down. I'm going to then sprinkle on some white embossing powder, tap off any of the excess, make sure to also get those squares off on the side, and then once my heat gun is nice and hot, I'm going to melt this embossing powder. Now once this has cooled for a few minutes, I'm going to take a Swiffer cloth and just buff over that to really make that dark cardstock come through again. And then I'm going to take the coordinating die, so this is the mini strips die, line up those squares with the squares on the die, hold it in place with that Scotch removable tape, and run these through my die cut machine. Now while I have my MISTI tool out, I'm going to stamp the On the Block Mom, and I'm lining this up in about the middle of my sugar cube cardstock. Then I'm going to stamp this in Granny Smith ink, so I'm picking all these colors that are going to coordinate with the backgrounds that I made. Once I stamp that down, I'm going to shift my cardstock up just a little bit, not close the door all the way just to make sure it fits. And then after I cleaned that stamp, I'm going to ink this up with Blueberry ink. I'll clean my stamp again, and I'm going to shift my cardstock down, make sure that still lines up so I have room for my coordinating die. And then I'm going to stamp this last one in Oreo ink. Once these are all stamped out, I'm going to take the coordinating die, line it up, and then run these through my die cut machine. So I have all the components ready to put my cards together. Now I have a few ways that I want to step these cards up just a bit. One of them is by coloring in those leaves so they look really pretty just stamped in black, but I'm going to take a YG01 and color over all of those leaves. Then I'm going to take a YG06. You could even go with a darker color, and I'm going to add just flicks of this darker color inside of all of those leaves just to give it a little bit of dimension. And I liked this look so much that off screen I did do it to all the rest of my cards, so the other two that I have off on the side. Now this particular panel, I trimmed down to 3 3/4 by 5 inches, and I'm going to layer the back of it with foam tape to give this some dimension. I'm going to add this to a card front that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, so it has a really nice white margin around my printed background. And then I'm taking my black On the Block Mom and a black sentiment that says Happy Mother's Day, and I'm just going to attach that with my tape runner. So this is card number 1, which is great as is, but I'm going to take the other 2 cards and kind of step them up with other elements from my stash. Now the next card I'm going to finish off has a lot of greens to it. So I have a card panel here that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 that I stamped the wood plank background on with Granny Smith ink on Granny Smith cardstock. I have a white panel trimmed to 3 3/4 by 5 inches, and my stenciled panel is trimmed to 3 1/2 by 4 3/4, and I'm just layering these 2 panels together with a tape runner, then lining the back with foam tape and adding that to my Granny Smith cardstock. So that border just adds a little bit of interest to the background. I really like that wood plank. Then I have a heart cut from the Heart Stacklets from Pink Champagne cardstock that I added to the middle of my card front. And I'm just going to take the mom that I had stamped in Granny Smith ink and another sentiment and just attaching those with the tape runner. So that finishes card number 2. Now you may notice some little butterflies on there, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. My third card is using gumball cardstock that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 that I stamped the wood plank background on in gumball ink. I trimmed one of my panels down to 2 inches and then added it to a piece of Taffy cardstock, and I trimmed that down a little bit so it has just a really thin border there. So now obviously since I trimmed my background down, I have pieces left over to make more cards. So this border piece ends up measuring 2 inches by 4 1/4, and then just adding my blueberry mom and sentiment to the bottom. Now off screen, I had heat embossed some butterflies from the Social Butterfly stamp set. I heat embossed that in white onto some vellum and just taking a little bit of tape runner and adding that just to the bottom of my card there. I thought it was just a really cute touch, something a little extra to add to the cards. And I decided to go back and add these to my other cards as well. So here are 2 more little butterflies just right at the top of the corner. And on this one, since there's so much going on and it's so colorful, I am just using some liquid glue and some clear drip drops to finish off my card. And there we have 3 quick Mother's Day cards all ready to go to mail out. These products are all available at the Tailored Expressions website. The products will be listed down below in the video description as well. Thanks so much and see you again soon.